Morning, Isaac. Let's see what we got here. Missing. Morning. Not hearing it.
Can I say good morning to everybody? I'm gonna take the step and break the silence.
Good morning.
Good morning. Yeah, we're here.
Yes. Good morning, Commissioner. Good morning, everybody. Arthur O'Donnell, New Mexico PRC here. The appointed hour has come, 10 a.m. for our third workshop on the Community Solar Act implementation. And thank you all for joining us today. We're still getting a couple of people coming in, so I'm going to give it 2 minutes if you can, Commissioner, and then we'll start. The agenda for today was posted a minute ago, and hopefully you'll be able to see it again. There you go. Okay, there we go. We hit the magic number of 40 participants, doubling the number in the last 2 minutes. Good morning, everyone. Arthur O'Donnell here. Today we are going to spend some time to review the report that came out of the stakeholder advisory process that was facilitated by Strategen LLP and LLC, I guess they are. And Matthew McDonald is going to kind of walk through the major issues that were addressed by the participants and kind of where people seem to be gravitating. We'll talk about the actual nature of agreement, non-agreement in that context when we get there. But then I will give a presentation on unresolved issues, talk about both things that were unresolved in the stakeholder process and things that the stakeholder process were not able to get to, and try and start sorting some priorities. And then after a break, we'll have Russell Fisk from the Office of the General Counsel come and discuss the notice of proposed rulemaking process and draft schedule that we put together so that we can reach agreement on the major policy issues by April 1st, 2022, as per the terms of SB 84, the Community Solar Act. But first of all, I'd like to introduce Commissioner Joseph Maestas, who is the lead commissioner on this proceeding. And Commissioner Maestas is going to extend a welcome and give you some expectations. Commissioner.
Thank you, Arthur. Again, good morning, everyone, and welcome to our third and final workshop on our community solar stakeholder engagement process. As many of you know, we deal with a lot of statutes and rules, but this pre-rulemaking effort is not required. So we at the agency of our own volition feel that this process really provides a great opportunity for everybody to participate in a disarming, less formal process. And so I'm proud of all the work that you've done. I'm also proud of the incredible diversity of participants that we've had in this process. I was kind of sitting down and thinking about my remarks, and I couldn't help but think about the long journey that's brought us here today. And the word that comes to mind is perseverance. We're standing on the shoulders of so many people like Senator Liz Stefanik and other legislators. All of you community solar advocates would neither quit nor give up. And I think that is so noble and admirable. The repeated legislative attempts over the last 5 years and the fine work of the 2020 Community Solar Working Group, all of that has resulted in the successful push that led to the passage and signing of the Community Solar Act. But I'm here to tell you, okay, here's the dose of reality. We're not done yet. We have some of the most challenging tasks ahead. And so it's critical that everyone remain focused and engaged as we move forward and pivot from this more informal stakeholder engagement process and pivot into the more formal rulemaking process. But, as a former mayor, I always have to have context in terms of what I'm doing. And so before we immerse ourselves in the issues that Arthur outlined, the unresolved challenging issues, and get into the report, we mustn't forget about the role that community solar plays in our overall transition to a clean energy future. The energy justice that we need in this transition to clean energy, and the sheer impact of community solar on our economy that is in so much need of diversification. I think the Bureau of Business and Economic Research estimated about a $500 million economic impact from community solar alone. So we have to think about the context of community solar as well. So, as Arthur outlined, over the next 3 hours or so, we're going to be discussing the Strategen report and those unresolved issues. But I'm here to tell you the report is complete. It's meant to document the pre-rulemaking stakeholder engagement process and make way for the start of the formal rulemaking process. And this isn't the end of it. All of you will still get a bite at the apple, but now the timeline and the framework is going to be much more compressed and regimented. And so it's really critical that you understand the nature of the rulemaking process. And I know that all of you out there want certain things in this rule. And my hope is that we understand that we're working in a consensus environment and that compromise is necessary. But we can't get it done, without people being open-minded and willing to compromise. And, besides, this is, it's not called a pilot, but essentially it's structured as a pilot. And this program over the course of the next 3 years will be evaluated with a report that has to be submitted to the state legislature. In fact, I and members of our PRC community solar team will be presenting to a legislative committee on Thursday. And so they're already calling us forward to report on this. So we're almost there. And as we begin the notice of proposed rulemaking process, all of you will have an opportunity to submit comments. We're going to have a public hearing, and all those comments will be considered in the final rule. But some decisions may have to be made through our PRC Community Solar Action Team. So, this is really important work. And as I said before, a lot has been done to get us here. We just need to cross the finish line, and I hope we cross the finish line together, because what you're all doing and what you're a part of is something bigger than ourselves. And all of you should feel extremely proud of the work you've done. This is the beginning, I think, of your legacy in bringing community solar to the state of New Mexico. And, from my perspective too, we all talk about energy justice and ensuring that less fortunate don't fall through the cracks in this transition to a clean energy economy. And this is the first piece of legislation that has explicit requirements and set-asides for low to moderate income communities. And so now we're not just talking, we're getting it done. And so I think that's another significant development in this state legislation. So let me just kind of recap the general timeline. The agency, after the conclusion of this workshop, is going to issue the notice of proposed rulemaking. It's probably going to take place over a couple of meetings. We hope to maybe get the notice of proposed rulemaking approved by the commission no later than October 27th. In December of this year, comments will be due, and response comments will also be due through the entire month of December. In January is when we expect to have the public hearing and comment period, with reply comments due by the end of January of next year. And in the February-March of 2022 timeframe, that's the review period and the drafting of the final rule and submittal to the commission for its consideration. And at the end of March, we meet every Wednesday. On the March 23rd and 30th, we expect to or plan to deliberate and discuss the final rule and hopefully get it passed to meet the statutory deadline of April 1st of 2022. So in conclusion, I want to leave you with a quote from Martin Luther King. And he said, "If you can't fly, then run. If you can't run, then walk. If you can't walk, then crawl. But whatever you do, you have to keep moving forward." And that's my message. Let's keep moving forward. Adelante, which is Spanish for forward. I like to say that. So please participate, enjoy the remainder of this final workshop, and prepare for the rulemaking process. So thank you all again, and I look forward to a great workshop. Thank you. Back to you, Arthur.
Great. Thank you very much, Commissioner Maestas. We really appreciate your guidance throughout this process. As you indicated, it is probably one of the more difficult things to do this level of detailed work on a very short time frame. And while we needed to devote a lot of time to even sorting out and working out the issues that needed to be addressed, the participation portion that led off the beginning of this process is incredibly important. One, for making sure that voices are heard as the act dictated, but also to really get a sense of where people are and what their hopes are for the program. Now, I agree with you that not everybody's going to get what they want, because we do have to make some difficult choices in terms of being able to implement the program. But I feel, after reading the Strategy report, that we have a much better sense of the art of the possible and a real strong sense of the gravity of certain proposals and ideas, and kind of, where people's support and advocacy will come into play as we move forward in the rulemaking. And I think that that's a really valuable thing, and I want to thank Strategy for facilitating that. With that, that brings to the table Matt McDonald, who is a principal with Strategy, who was the main facilitator, along with his colleague Maggie Field. And Matt is going to walk us through both the process and make some comments on the level of participation, the quality of participation, and also address the top 10 major issues that were able to be addressed in this process, and give us an indication of both where it seems many, if not most, people want to go, but also what work is still ahead for the commission. Because I think that if you've gotten a chance to read the report, you'll see that there are a number of issues in which the participants just said, well, more work needs to be done. And that's really what we're here to try and figure out, is what else will need to be done. So Matthew, you with us? I see you on screen, and you should be able to share your slides.
All right, let me pull those up, Arthur. Confirming you can hear my audio, okay.
Okay, you're fine. And I'm going to started screen sharing, and your slides are up, and so I'm going to disappear.
All right, let's see here. How is this showing? Let me turn off my.
I've got 3/4 of the slide and 1/2 of the graph.
Let's see. Let's try this again.
Why don't you move? Can you move your screen over a little bit, and so we just have the slides? I think the procedural schedule is your second slide.
I think I need to turn off. No.
That's better. Better.
I just need to turn off the presenter view here. That's what's causing us problems. Bear with me for just a second.
Okay, we have a full screen of the procedural schedule right now.
Okay, good. We'll
dispense with the title page.
That's right. That's right. All right. Well, welcome everyone. Excited to be here at workshop number 3. I just wanted to echo the comments of Commissioner Maestas as well as Arthur, and just acknowledge the process that we've been working through as a part of the multiple working groups, beginning back with the first workshop in June of this year. And just at the outset, I want to thank all of the working group participants for what was an incredibly productive, a very civil and just respectful discourse throughout the entire process. And around issues that are often, contentious, and knowing that folks have, strong views across a number of these issues. And so I just want to, again, extend gratitude and also compliment all of the working group participants for such a robust and meaningful contribution to this process. So we'll start, as Arthur mentioned, with just stepping through and reminding folks the sort of process that journey we've been on together since the summer. And then I'll step into and remind folks a little bit about sort of the goals that we had set for ourselves at the outset of this working group process, and then step through each of the 10 topics that we had flagged and discussed as a working group, and asked folks to submit final comments around in articulating their position. And the working group report from Strategy attempts to, do a yeoman's job of sort of synthesizing that, summarizing parties' positions, but also trying to highlight those areas and centers of gravity around, for which the commission might benefit from that information carrying forward into a draft notice of proposed rulemaking. So with respect to the procedural schedule we've been on together, we kicked things off in June with workshop number 1. And then we stepped through a series of 3 working group meetings. We divided our working groups up into subgroup A and B, and we'll reflect in just a moment on the sort of topic areas that were captured under each of those subgroups. But our first working group meeting was back in July of 2020, July 22. Our second working group meeting on August 5th, and our final working group meeting on September 2nd, which included a wrap-up session where both subgroups came together and we stepped through the final issues in preparation for working group final position statements or comments to be submitted later on in September, and with the recent release of the working group report, culminating this process. Be remiss to not mention the August 27th workshop number 2, which we used as an opportunity to step through some of these issues in a bit more detail and continue to help further this process. And Commissioner Maestas spoke to, as did Arthur, the fact that this is not the end of this proceeding by any stretch. This is not the end of parties' involvement in this docket. This does mark the end of sort of Stratagen's involvement as in the role of facilitation through these working groups. And again, very honored and grateful to be a part of this process and helping to raise the voices of a lot of productive discussions. So just to refresh, what we attempted to achieve through this process is really to identify stakeholder proposals and position statements throughout this effort. We started with the Commission's list of issues that it surfaced coming out of the Community Solar Act, and we tried to hone in on a smaller subset of those, just given the length of time that we had to work with, the 3 working groups not being in an immense amount of time to sort through all of these very complex and detailed issues. And ultimately what we're trying to do with that subset of issues is really, begin to try to move towards areas of agreement and disagreement, identify those, and where we could, really trying to facilitate some understanding and movement towards consensus as much as possible, just narrowing and bounding the universe of the possible as the Commission, and just to assist the Commission as it moves into this NOPR stage. So, what we saw coming out of this process was, a real identification of some of the top priorities, from the working group stakeholders. We were also able to develop a report that highlighted these key issues, highlighted areas of agreement and disagreement, summarized the comments that we received. And then we also tried to do a bit of, narrowing the funnel as well, trying to identify different options for the Commission to consider as it steps forward in this process. And just as a reminder, our subgroups throughout this process across the 3 working group meetings, subgroup A centered around topics that were under the umbrella of sort of market oversight, and subgroup B centered around topics of consumer protection and rate making, acknowledging that many of our most active participants were participating across both subgroups, and the final comments that we received, were included topics that extended across both. So without further ado, I just wanted to begin to step through the different topics that we addressed, all 10 of them. I certainly want to, refer folks to the working group report itself, because there is so much nuance that is lost in a short presentation such as this. There are a lot of, varieties of different party positions that have been taken. And we don't want to necessarily lose sight of all the variety of perspective here. And a lot of that's captured within the working group report. So just as a caveat at the outset, I think there's just a necessity of format and brevity, having to sort of take some liberties in terms of summarizing, where folks were on a lot of these topics, but do want to refer everyone to the working group report itself, encourage folks to take a look at that, read through that report to understand a bit more fully where parties' positions were and, where some of those centers of gravity were emanating. And so with that, just stepping into the first topic for discussion today. So topic one was the process for selection of community solar project proposals. So in other words, how is community solar program capacity allocated to individual community solar projects? And there were two options that were surfaced through the working group discussions. The first option was more of a sort of tariff-based, first come, first serve option. And the second being a non-price RFP or a sort of non-price solicitation that would include, non-price criteria for evaluation and selection of projects. Certainly pros and cons of either approach. I think, what came up in a lot of the discussion around the first come, first serve approach is that, in other jurisdictions where this methodology has been embraced, there are often interconnection queue, wait times and issues, and some projects end up not, ultimately being viable through that process. So what we saw from the comments that came through is a lot of the dialogue. I think there was strong support from a large swath of the working group participants for a non-price RFP selection process. We also took a look at program administration. And so, who should administer, the selection of projects? Should this be utility administered? Should this be third-party administered? Or should this be perhaps utility administered with an independent observer to maintain some, elements of increased transparency and independence to the selection process? So what we saw through a lot of the comments was that there was, some level of support for a third-party administrator. I think the way that the working group report characterized it as well is that, another option for the commission to consider is the utilization of an independent observer in lieu of third-party administration to sort of, achieve some of the same goals that a third-party administrator would seek to achieve as well. When we looked at a lot of the comments, some other elements that rose to the top was just this notion about interconnection. Interconnection continually came up in our discussions, even though it wasn't the focus of any one topic. The reason that we didn't focus on it is because I know that Arthur and the commission are, working through interconnection in a separate proceeding and are addressing a lot of these same types of issues in a broader context. So we wanted to allow that process to continue to play out, certainly. And I think, what we saw was a lot of support for the interconnection sort of being handled outside of the RFP process itself. And then there being a need for sort of holistic determination of design of the interconnection process and how interconnection costs are handled. I think one thing that came through was this recognition that when you look across the country at other community solar programs, there are a few elements that stand out that sort of can, for lack of a better characterization, make or break the success of a community solar program. And interconnection is one really challenging issue that a lot of jurisdictions have faced. And so I think what we saw was a lot of comments that acknowledged that and proposed approaches to perhaps begin to get arms around that and tackle that process in a way that's streamlined, effective, and also fair for all customers, both subscribers and non-subscribers. Arthur, do you want to take questions after each topic, or should we run through all 10 and then we can do some Q&A at the end? What's your preference?
You know, I would actually prefer going through the 10 issues and then coming back to them, and would encourage people to take notes on the things that they want to revisit. We should have plenty of time, but I don't want to get sidetracked and have to rush at the end.
Understood. That sounds great. We'll keep it moving. On to topic number 2. So topic number 2 pertains to the allocation of the 200 megawatt community solar program cap as specified within the legislation. And so just as a bit of background on this topic, just consistent with discussions within the working group, Strategy had highlighted 2 key options regarding this topic to help inform and sort of guide final comments from all the participants. The 2 options that we had surfaced that sort of rose to the top throughout our discussions was, an allocation of the 200 megawatt program cap to each of the investor-owned utilities based on a proportional share related to the total kilowatt hours delivered electricity, or an allocation of the 200 megawatt program cap to each of the IOUs based on sort of an addressable market proportion. This addressable market proportion is acknowledging that per the requirements of the legislation, only certain sort of categories of customers are eligible to participate in the community solar program, and that excludes industrial customers. So for those IOUs that have a larger industrial customer base, a total kilowatt hour delivered electricity proportional allocation may just not reflect adequately the actual addressable market in each service territory. So what we saw from the comments was consensus around the addressable market approach to program capacity allocation. There were some differences of opinion as to how one might calculate the addressable market, quote unquote. Where that difficulty comes in is the eligibility for small commercial customers to participate in the community solar program, and it being less, as well as sort of nonprofit entities and larger organizations. And so it makes it a little less straightforward to try and wrap one's arm around a precise addressable market. But what we saw from the comments was, for purposes of simplification and a nice proxy value for the addressable market approach, was to just be utilizing the residential kilowatt hour sales in a proportional allocation of program capacity consistent with that. And when one does that, as the Christopher has shown in one of the prior workshops, the allocation of megawatts across the IOUs would break down as to 125 megawatts to PNM, 45 megawatts to SPS, and 30 megawatts to EPE. And I think as we step through the comments and understood the pros and cons, obviously this is, as all of these are, it's a decision for the commission to consider going forward. But I think the Strategy team in reviewing the comments was certainly amenable and understanding of the desire to sort of streamline and have a simpler proxy for the addressable market proportionality. Moving on to topic number 3, determining and applying the value of solar credits. Okay, so this really goes to the heart of any community solar program. This relates to how do we determine the bill credit rate that a subscriber to a community solar program will receive on his or her bill, and what is that value for each sort of class of subscribing customer to a community solar program. And just as some background and context as reference for this topic, per SB 84, the bill itself defined total aggregate retail rate. And it defined total aggregate retail rate as the total amount of qualifying utilities demand, energy, and other charges converted to a kilowatt hour rate, including fuel and power cost adjustments, the value of renewable energy attributes, and other charges of the qualifying utilities effective rate schedule applicable to a given customer rate class. And the charge set forth in SB 84 was to take the total aggregate retail rate less commission approved distribution costs. And I think of all the topics, and Arthur sort of spoke to this at the outset, this is one that I think, I and the strategy team would certainly like to flag as one where, further work is certainly going to be required. I do want to thank all of the working group participants for beginning to walk down this road, which is a very challenging one. I know the utilities provided some data to help inform folks' comments on this topic. Some of the feedback that we received from working group participants was, questions around some of the utility provided data, perhaps the need for additional data in some parties' positions. And I think also flagging the fact that, the city of Las Cruces also provided a different approach to administrative setting of a bill credit rate that may not, require a full cost of service study development to sort of really unpack. So there is a variety of different views on this topic, as one might expect, given the challenging nature of it, as well as the import of it. And I think some of the key takeaways from this particular topic was, that, clearly there is consensus that, the bill credit rate, consistent with legislative intent and in the language in the statute, is that it should be derived from the total aggregate retail rate, less commission approved distribution costs. And one of the points of contention that came through in some of the comments was, the utilities interpreting distribution costs as inclusive of transmission costs and inclusive of sort of all energy delivery costs. And that was, I think, one sort of key point of disagreement as to how does one interpret the plain language of the statute. Does sort of less commission approved distribution costs, does that include transmission costs as well as distribution costs? I think another comment that came through was, for certain investor-owned utilities, due to rate case settlements or other reasons, there's not consistent up-to-date cost of service studies across all three of the IOUs. And so that can, create some complications if folks are trying to inform their proposed rate design. And it's something that the commission will need to think through and address going forward. Topic number 4, this relates to, again, harkening back to SB 84 and the statute as implemented. There is a limitation or sort of articulation that the community solar program, should not necessarily, incur cross subsidization. But if the commission were determined that, in the best interests in the public interest, that for some cross subsidization to occur, there is a 3% limitation on that. It's not very well defined within the legislation itself. But we wanted to tackle that because it was flagged as an important issue from the commission's perspective, to make sure that it was thinking about this requirement from the outset of program design, such that any sort of design criteria and decisions were being made with this requirement in mind. That being said, we spoke about this multiple times during the working group process, and there was real general consensus around this topic that just more information and data around the performance, costs, and benefits of actual deployed community solar projects needed to be gathered before it was, I think, appropriate or right to begin to calculate and apply any sort of limitation on cross subsidization going forward. And there was also consensus or general position among many working group participants that the commission should determine what constitutes cross subsidization, and that sort of all benefits and all costs should be considered in such a determination. All right, topic number 5. So this relates to guidelines for siting and co-location of community solar projects. I think, again, just for a little broader context to this topic, this co-location issue has been one that we've seen prove vexing for a couple of early jurisdictions that led the way
Hey, Rob.
when it comes to community solar. Yes, do we have a question? Okay, I'll keep on keeping on. So, as I mentioned, a few leading jurisdictions within the community solar space, had some issues with co-location. I think one key element was that there's no limit on sort of co-location of a community solar project with non-community solar projects. And I think there was a variety of different views as to what should bound and guide co-location of community solar projects to one another. I think generally speaking, we saw the strongest support for allowing co-located community solar projects totaling up to 5 megawatts on the same parcel if projects are interconnected to different substations. But there were a number of other approaches to the co-location requirement that the commission may also wish to consider. And I've listed them here in this slide. They're also certainly captured within the working group report. I don't want to go through those in detail. I think that, they're different flavors of the same spirit. I mean, clearly here, there is a desire to not circumvent.
This is no big deal because I can understand. I mean, we have a recordation.
I just hoping folks can keep their mic on mute as we're stepping through the rest of this presentation until Q&A. And then I think the spirit of all of these recommendations is consistent with I think the guidance within the legislation is that the capacity cap for an individual community solar project is 5 megawatts. So the idea here and some of the challenges that other jurisdictions have faced is co-locating projects in a manner and method that sort of in practice sought to sort of exceed the individual project cap amount. And so I think all of these approaches seek to address that core issue. In topic 6, this relates to criteria for low-income customer definition, subscriber eligibility and verification, as well as pre-qualification. So the low-income component of the community solar program in Mexico is quite significant. 30% of subscribers for community solar projects, must be low-income customers. And so, consistent with guidance from the legislation, there's a real need to identify and sort of help develop a list of low-income pre-qualifying programs that can help to, serve as a proxy qualification for a customer to be considered low-income. We also, through the conversations, identified self-certification attestation of low-income status as an opportunity to, assert sort of the low-income customer qualification component of this. So we did see strong support from working group participants and comments for both self-attestation as well as the utilization of some pre-qualifying low-income programs. And some of those programs were indicated through comments, including Medicaid, SNAP, LIHEAP, affordable housing, and the like. And then there was identification of the potential use of a third-party low-income service organization to help with outreach and enrollment. And I think that, throughout all this is going to be an important issue, and it's one that's really challenging. I think the intention here is always to make sure that low-income customer segment is being reached and encouraged to participate in this program. And it's such an important element of the program design. And so I think, the spirit that we saw through a lot of working group participant comments is just ensuring that there's a fair, equitable, and sound way of sort of pre-qualifying potential low-income customers, and doing so in a way that's not intrusive, doing so in a way that wouldn't end up, unintentionally discouraging low-income customers from coming into the program. So starting with a list of low-income programs, if you're already enrolled in one of these, you're sort of pre-qualified to serve as a low-income customer in the community solar program is a great place to start. What we heard from participants as well is that, self-attestation is a safe and sound way to allow for low-income customers to come into this program as well. Topic 7, subscriber eligibility criteria. So, there was identified a need to sort of agree upon a definition for small commercial customers. Small commercial customers per the statute and SB 84 are allowed to participate in community solar program, but the quote unquote small commercial customer is not a sort of well-defined class across each of the investor-owned utilities. And so, we identified as a group that, ideally this small commercial, customer eligibility would be consistent, across the program for all customers in New Mexico. And we encourage stakeholders to, propose definitions and sort of propose some criteria for this going forward. And so we saw some strong support for defining small commercial customers sort of as those already under some existing, tariffs across the 3 RUs. So within PNM service territory, the small power service tariff, EPE's small general service, and SPS's small general service tariffs, and included here the size of commercial customers falling under each. So less than 50 kilowatts for PNM and EPE's small power service and small general service tariffs accordingly, as well as less than 25 kilowatts for SPS. Moving to topic number 8, this relates to the uniform disclosure form that a subscriber organization would need to be sharing with a prospective subscriber. And this really, is the heart of a lot of sort of the key artifact for consumer protection in a lot of community solar programs. And so, just based on our discussions within the working group and reviewing a lot of the submitted comments from participants, we tried to summarize some of the key elements as consideration for creation of uniform disclosure form. And some of those key elements are listed here and were shared with parties. I know that Arthur, you and commission staff are also working on this in parallel in terms of, I believe, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, creating a separate standalone working group to continue to work through this issue, among others. And I think what we saw from the comments was that there is some more detail to be done, maybe some sharpening of pencils still, but there was a key strong support for simplicity and clear communication of the role of different parties within this uniform disclosure form. And I think when we look across the country at best practices in this space, more is not always better. It can be overwhelming for a customer, and at the core of this is consumer protection. So do want to be able to balance some of these competing interests of like getting a lot of information from the customer, but also ensuring that it's simple enough and brief enough that customer is actually going to be able to read it and understand it, and derive the consumer protection benefits from it. All right, so getting towards the home stretch here, topic number 9, potential limitations on the use of RECs by investor-owned utilities. So consistent with the program design as articulated by the legislature, any RECs, that would be associated with the renewable generation from a community solar project would be automatically transferred to the utility. And so we didn't have a chance to really dive deeply into this in our working group discussions, but we did want to surface it and allow for comment in the submission of final comments from all the working group participants. So a couple of key questions we did tee up for folks to comment on is around this issue of utility retirement of RECs for community solar projects. We heard throughout the process the possibility of some positions, some folks' positions indicating that perhaps utilities should be, encouraged or required to retire RECs that are received from community solar projects. And then we also wanted to tee up, consistent with some of the language I quoted previously around the total aggregate retail rate, wanted to understand folks' perspectives on whether the value of renewable energy attributes should also be sort of reflected in the bill credit rate that's ultimately applied to subscribers' bills. So a couple of key takeaways on this particular topic. There was strong support for allowing the investor-owned utilities to sell or transfer RECs at their discretion, that they're consistent with the legislation, that there wasn't requirements around utility retirement of RECs. And that, a lot of folks also express support for including the value of RECs or including the value of renewable energy attributes, perhaps more broadly, to be captured within the bill credit mechanism. On the last, well, maybe perhaps penultimate topic for today, there's a couple other issues that fell outside of our 10 identified topics that I do want to just briefly touch on. But topic 10 relates to the criteria for registration of subscriber organizations. So, I think is consistent with some of the comments submitted from stakeholders throughout our process. Strategy team noted that the commission should consider the following information from subscriber organizations as key criteria. And this was comments submitted in advance of each of the working groups and then reiterated in the final comments. And we had flagged for our final comment folks that sort of some key criteria for consideration includes organizational type, parent company or other corporate affiliations, including utility involvement, sort of a brief description of the subscriber organization's involvement in community solar energy, or power generation development in the past, description of projects the subscriber organization intends to develop, or it's just sort of demonstrating past experience and its intentions in the space, and sort of the attestation that this entity will comply with all program rules, and then the final one being flagging any sort of legal actions that have been taken against the subscriber organization. So, there was, through the final comments themselves, there was some, in terms of key takeaways, there was some consensus for a streamlined process that, not requiring commission approval, sort of a shorter list that is easier to administer. And I think there was, some discussion around the considerations that might be included in a standard form contract to again, help streamline and facilitate an expeditious administration and deployment of community solar projects once they are assigned capacity and approved. A couple other issues that came up throughout throughout some of the final comments, as well as some of the discussions, but that weren't neatly captured in those 10 topics that we just ran through. The issue of consolidated billing came up a few times, including in final comments. And there is desire here to incorporate sort of a community solar subscriber organization subscription fee directly into a subscriber's monthly utility bill, and sort of eliminates the need for an additional sort of separate bill and transaction between the subscriber and the subscriber organization. This was cited as a potential barrier for low-income subscribers to participate. So something that the strategy team certainly wanted to call out and flag for commission consideration. And then the second piece being sort of native community solar projects and rural electric cooperative cooperation. Of course, tribal authorities as well as rural co-ops are permitted to participate in the community solar program. And Sovereign Energy in particular had certain recommendations regarding native community solar projects, as well as rural electric co-op participation in the community solar program. And their recommendations included, sort of creating bill credit rates for all classifications and subscribers of the service territories for all qualifying utilities, since native community solar projects are not limited to the definition of subscribers, applicable to other community solar projects in investor-owned utility service territories. That there be a standard process for implementation and interconnection of native community solar projects, that there create a subgroup to engage low-income stakeholders and disproportionately impacted communities, and to create a formal process and timeline to conduct meaningful consultation with Indian Nation tribes and pueblos. And then finally, helping to provide clarity in the opt-in process for rural electric co-ops, and request information from rural electric co-ops about how they might consider participating in the program. So a lot of really salient points raised in those comments and recommendations, and wanted to flag those again due to temporal constraints and our desire to try and coalesce around a lot of issues that we felt would be pertinent and most salient for the commission to have some guidance and information around as they move into the NOPR stage. We weren't able to fully unpack and address all of these recommendations surfaced by Sovereign Energy, but I did want to flag them both in the working group report as well as my remarks today. So with that, I appreciate your patience in letting me run through those prepared remarks and giving a really sweeping overview of the working group report. Certainly not giving full justice to all of the varied and nuanced positions that all of our working group participants put forth. So again, do encourage folks to take a look at the working group report itself, as there's a bit more detail and unpacks the full topology of different perspectives as well. So with that, many thanks to the New Mexico PRC for allowing Strategian to help support throughout this process. And again, a big thanks to my colleague Maggie Field, as well as all of the working group participants for a really strong, productive, robust process with a real diverse set of voices coming throughout. So many thanks again.
Great. Matt, thank you very much. We really appreciate your working through this. You're not done yet, but I am going to give you an opportunity to take a couple of deep breaths.
Thanks.
And I'm going to suggest that we have time. We have really a goodly amount of time for discussion and some questions so that people understand really kind of like what some of the, not just the choices that are being presented to the commission, but the implications of those choices. And I'll suggest that we actually kind of go through again in the step-by-step approach and have discussion around each of the individual items before we move on to the next one to try and minimize the jumping around. Now, recognizing that there is some overlap in issues, but I think that the Strategy report itself has done a really good job of not siloing these, but really making them discrete issues to be addressed. And obviously, it'll be up to the commission with assistance of the stakeholders and the interveners to draw the lines between them, right? Connect the dots so that we have more of a holistic program. I think I saw that that term used. So we're going to go back to first, which is the administration of project selection. And a key component of the discussion and also Strategen's kind of suggestion to the commission is that we have two elements to evaluating bid from project developers. And one is a kind of a minimum threshold, right? These are requirements that we expect everyone to make a showing of. And then the elements that would be subject to scoring. Now, I will recognize that at least a couple of the utilities wanted to include some price factors in the scoring. I really didn't understand what we were going to be basing price factors on because the commission doesn't have any jurisdiction over the price that, for instance, the subscriber organization would be charging to subscribers. Really, the only thing we get to choose is the bill credit, which would be universal, right, per territory and per rate class. So, Matthew, can you talk a little bit about, first of all, the minimum criteria, and I'll just list them so you don't have to remember them. Site control, and how we separate site control out from interconnection, because that's an issue one there. A commitment to meeting or exceeding statutory subscriber requirements. Permits that may be required for the development in certain locales. Some showing of benefits to the local New Mexico community, including meeting the business, resident, veteran business requirements that were built into the act. And that was particularly tricky for the commission to try and figure out. General preference for projects that support local businesses or employ local labor. Workforce training, provide local job training, and outreach and partnerships with local communities, community-based project ownership. And I get a sense that there's a little bit of overlap there with things that might be scored.
Yeah.
That I know there was sentiment for projects that are intricately connected to local communities or even hosted by local communities get a higher score. But can you talk about first the minimum and then go into kind of like what areas are left for scoring?
Yeah, absolutely, Arthur. Happy to speak to that. So with respect to some of the minimum bid requirements, this is sort of, the initial stage gate that would help to ensure whomever is administering project selection is particularly in a non-price RFP where you're trying to score these projects on a relatively qualitative basis across a number of criteria, that the projects that you're evaluating have some minimal threshold of viability of going forward. And I think one of the most critical ones that we've seen across other jurisdictions is this legally binding site control. In site control, I guess, to just differentiate between interconnection itself, Arthur, is this is really about do you have the legal authority to establish a community solar facility on a parcel of land, either through a lease agreement or through land ownership rights. And there's a number of different ways to determine legally binding site control, but that's a key one, because where that falls away, or if that's not adequately established, the administrator of the community solar program could be scoring and assigning capacity to projects that end up dropping out completely because they ultimately don't have this legal authority to construct a facility where they're intending to. So that's critical. I think when you look at some of these other sort of minimum threshold requirements, what we were trying to reflect and sort of surface from and synthesize from the final comments that we received was some of the criteria that are really at the heart of how we interpreted SB 84's design intentions. And so certainly things like the 30% low income subscription requirement, that's something that, again, it's an open question as to whether the commission would want to require a prospective subscriber organization to demonstrate full subscriptions before even getting into the queue. I think what you'd want to do is sort of have some attestation or statement of intent of complying with the 30% low income requirement. There's other ways to deal with that. And then when you're talking about benefits to the local and New Mexico community, again, I think when you're talking about this sort of initial threshold, it's a lower bar to clear than when you get into the scoring criteria. So I think it's this intent that your community solar project is designed and intended to comply with the spirit of SB 84 and the broader criteria that are circled around that. And then when you get into the scoring criteria itself and the administrator begins to score across these different categories, that's when you can kind of look into the more specifics of, okay, well, what does that mean? What benefits specifically are you pointing to in terms of benefiting the local New Mexico community? How are you hitting upon some of these themes that the legislature has identified? And that's, I think, where you can start to score that. But I think having some sort of good faith showing at the outset that this is the intention, and then stepping into the scoring stage.
Okay, I'm going to open it up to questions or comments from the field. I will ask you to use the reactions button on the bottom to raise your hand, and I'll do my best to see that your hand is raised. One of the good things about Zoom is that it kind of moves your little placeholder, your little avatar over into a place where I can see it if you raise your hand. But while you're preparing your question and putting your hand up, one of the issues that we're just facing over and over again is a chicken and egg problem, Matt. And that is, how can we show project maturity before a project is selected, right? How can we allow subscriber recruitment before we know which projects are actually going to be eligible, right? And different jurisdictions have dealt with this differently. Some of them, I think it was Oregon, you have to get selected first, and then there's an open window for signing up subscribers, right? There is some contemplation in the act here that we would have a subscriber organization vet a universe of potential subscribers, but they don't sign up with an individual project until that project is viable. At least I'm reading that into the act. That's not exactly what the act says, but that seems to be what it suggests. So this chicken and egg thing, particularly about site control, particularly about recruitment of subscribers.
So yeah, I think this is a really important question, Arthur. And what at least my personal view, and I think the view that's reflected throughout some of the conversations, the working group participants, what we don't want, I think, for an effective program design and for an effective customer experience is for prospective subscriber organizations. So these are projects that haven't yet been selected to sort of have to run around and sign up subscribers before they even determine whether or not they'll be allocated capacity. I think what that potentially sets up is a lot of confusion among subscribers and a lot of headaches for all parties involved, the commission, customers, utilities, and as well as developers. So it'd be my recommendation. I think this is consistent with a lot of the comments that we received. There are some of these threshold criteria can help you establish some level of, as you described it, project maturity, but you don't want to require a full suite of subscribers to be in hand at this stage of the process. As you mentioned, other jurisdictions have addressed this in ways where there's a sort of 6-month window where, once the project is sort of, live and energized, like you still have a little bit of a 6-month buffer to make sure that you're not being penalized fully for lack of a full subscription base. So there's ways to sort of encourage a full subscriber list through the program design itself, but to also give that sort of buffer such that once the project is selected, program capacity is allocated to it, then a full subscriber set can be developed. And you're not confusing customers by thinking they're signing up for community solar program, only to realize after the fact, perhaps to varying degrees of communication, that they're actually not signed up for one that's viable. So I hope that's responsive to the question.
Yeah, well, it is for the commission to determine.
Yeah.
But at least one other state had a thing of minimum 30%, right, of your capacity has already been kind of locked up, and then you have that time to fill in the rest. I'm not quite sure how we'll deal with that. I have a question that came in chat, and then Anastasia Stevens has her hand raised. So we're going to go to Christian Casillas, who put the question in chat. If the commission decides on a non-price RFP process, would there be a working group of representative stakeholders to determine the components and relevant weightings? And if so, when would this be formed? And Matt, you can't answer this question because I can't answer this question. This is for the commission to determine what step to go forward. We envision that there will be opportunities for some continued subgroup activity. The problem, and this can be addressed later on when we get to the NOPR process, is that once we kick off a formal proposed rulemaking, there really isn't a good way under New Mexico's process for incorporating informal recommendations into the process, right? Unless they come in the form of a proposal or a petition or something like that to be addressed. And anybody who's worked in the regulatory arena knows that you can't be introducing new ideas as you're going along. You really need to scope out exactly what this proceeding is going to be covering from the beginning. So we're in a time constraint here. The options that are available to the commission have a lot to do with the administration of the program, which I'll talk about a little bit later on. Do we allow, for instance, an independent administrator or evaluator to work with the utilities to come up with those criteria and how they'll be scored, and then have some process for people to vet that, right? Or does the commission just determine that and then impose it on everybody? We haven't gotten there yet, so we will note this as a very important element to be addressed. Okay, Anastasia, please identify yourself and thank you.
Good morning. I'm Anastasia Stevens, representing the city of Las Cruces, and thank you for the opportunity to be here and to have made comments. I'm going to just kind of reiterate a concern that we had in our written comments and questions, is that I don't really know what a non-price RFP is. I mean, not have, the city hasn't done this before. But it seems that at some point, just nuts and bolts to have a successful community solar project, and particularly to have one that's viable for the low income customers to whom this is based, it's got to work economically. So I hope that can be articulated somewhere along the line, that it's not all nice words and we're going to do this and we're going to do that, but somehow the bottom line has got to look good, which of course brings us back to the elephant in the room, which is the internet connection costs. And I won't even go there, but that was one thought. And the other thing that I have to raise is also in our written comments, is that this process, the city is very concerned that it not be all front loaded to one round of RFPs per utility that are done very shortly after the rulemaking. There was discussion of getting an RFP out by July, because if everything gets locked in or potentially locked in there just won't be the learning curve, and it seems it increases the possibility of, to be honest, what you were referring to, Arthur, like duds, ones that just can't produce. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Anastasia. And people can feel free to refer to your comments, because it is important that in the sorting of these issues, sometimes valuable ideas kind of, if they didn't rise to the top, can kind of get lost, and they still should be considered. And one of them that Anastasia raises is, do we do the capacity solicitation all at once, or do we do it in tranches? And this is still something that we would take comment on, and you'll see in a proposed rule that some stake in the ground will be made, and then we'll ask for people's comments on it. I will just note that when it comes to hearings, the commission reserves hearings for disputed issues of fact. So you kind of have a policy track where, there is no right or wrong, right? There is no correct or incorrect. There are just choices of policy to be made. And this is one of them, right? This is, do we do it all at once so that we can get projects in the ground by November 2024 so we can report to the legislature? Or do we take a kind of a tip your toe in the water approach and see how it goes and then move on to the next tranche? So that's a decision that needs to be made. Kevin Cray, you have your hand raised. I'm not hearing you, Kevin. I think you might be on mute, or you don't have your microphone on.
Sorry, I was on mute. First off, just wanted to say thanks for the report, Matt. I think it turned out really well and did a great job of capturing the robust set of comments that were submitted. So kudos to you and the strategy team and Maggie for pulling that together. On the topic of the subscribers, I think we raised some good points around not wanting to engage subscribers too early in the process and kind of not knowing whether they're actually associated with a real project or not. I think there are some easy mechanisms that can be done on the back end as far as ensuring that the subscription minimums are met. So you can kind of lock in a portal or have a simple analysis of the subscriber mix to just ensure that it continues to be in compliance over the long term. So just encourage folks to not maybe dwell on that too much. I think there's some just kind of practical applications of pretty easy restrictions that can be used there. And then on the thought of, one tranche or two tranches, I think the whole spirit of this initial, we'll call it a pilot phase of community solar, is to really get those lessons learned that culminates in that report to the commission. I can see value and kind of reasons for wanting to do it in multiple rounds, but just given the time and given the likelihood of getting enough projects kind of completed and subscription billing credits going out to customers, so that we have a nice, robust report from the PRC to the legislature in 2024. I just really encourage folks to keep an open mind for kind of a single tranche. If projects fall out along the way, in our comments, we provided a waitlist process. It'll kind of reallocate that capacity to the next best project in line and do that pretty swiftly. So I think that, from my perspective, would be kind of the best opportunity to kind of move that through. And yeah, thanks again.
Great, thank you, Kevin. And we did have a question here, which is how to get the report. Well, it is available. If you were a participant in the working group process, you should have gotten an email from Strategian with the report attached. If you were not a participant, it is now in the dockets for this proceeding. And you'll forgive me, but it's docket number 21-00112-UT. And you can go on the commission's website and go into the e-docket filing. And you don't even have to register. You can come in as a guest. And then you insert that docket number 21-00112-UT. And it'll bring up a list of the documents that are available. And if you click on the report, it'll download and then, to your computer, and then you can open it up that way. And if anybody,
this is Russell, just to add a little clarification, you'll find it under a notice of filing filed on Friday. That was also served on whoever was on our service list, which I think should include most participants, if not all. But you'll see a notice of filing, and it has 2 documents attached. That was on Friday, the report, the strategy report, and also the agenda for this this workshop. Sorry to interrupt, Art. I just wanted to clarify that.
Oh, that's okay. That's so people can find it. Also, that the report was uploaded in the shared file base for the working group, right? Strategian's repository for documents, and also was sent in it was attached in the email for the Zoom information sent to everybody who's on the Zoom today. So you have multiple ways of getting it. There were some comments in the chat, and this is really stuff that I can't deal with because it's not really questions. But I would encourage everybody to, we'll save the chat and we'll deal with some of these later on. A lot of this is just kind of like support for one position or another. With that, I don't see another hand raised. I'm going to say once, twice, 3 times, and then move on to topic number 2, which is the allocation of capacity among utilities. Now, as Matt described, this addressable market concept seems to be what people are gravitating towards, and the result is a little heavily loaded towards, projects in PNM territory with a little bit of, I kind of view it as El Paso is a 1, SPS is a 1.5, and then PNM is a 4 in terms of multiples of 30. Did anybody have any particular comments on that? I think there was a question earlier about whether this is a decision. It's not a decision. It's a recommendation. It's a proposed, and we would need to have actual quantification of the addressable market if possible. I think that Matthew identified the problem with that, which is that it's easy to identify the residential base. It's easy to identify the low income base, easier to identify the low income base. A little bit harder with the commercial. And then when you get into multifamily housing, that is in a whole different tariff. It's a little hard to identify those. And it's going to be a question for the commission is how precise do we need to be? Right, in identifying that, or can people live with this large allocation calculation? If you recall, in the August workshop, Christopher Dunn from the commission staff gave us 7 different ways to look at the allocation with quite a variety, but this outcome seems to be where we're going. So that's one element. And then the second is, of course, we're going to refine it by the availability of subscribers in those territories, right? If it does not seem like there's enough low income, I don't know how this could be, But if there's not enough low-income customers in PNM territory to support 125 megawatts, there's no reason for us to allocate 125 megawatts there, just as a principle. So I'll open it up to any questions on that front. If you have any thoughts, Matt, that goes deeper than what we talked about previously.
Oh, just from my perspective, Arthur, I think you laid that out well. I'm seeing a hand raised now from Christian, so perhaps we can.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead, Christian. Take yourself off mute.
Great, thank you. There's one piece within this section that I was curious whether or not it's worth discussing a little bit more. It's regarding unfulfilled allocations. So what would happen if within a territory after a certain amount of time the allocated capacity isn't fulfilled? And it seems like most of the comments that I read, with the exception of SPS's comment, was that there would be a way in which that unallocated capacity would be allocated to other IOUs. And so I just wanted to flag that again, in this pilot program, I'm curious what the argument would be to not reallocate unused capacity.
Okay, well, I don't think that we have an argument against it. It's really a mechanism for doing it. And I think that what you'll see, at least in the proposed rule, will be a time period. If a certain number of months after the initial solicitation results come in, there is still unallocated capacity in certain territories, the commission will determine whether to reassign that to another territory. It all has to do with, the sense of demand, right? And we won't know the demand for this program until we actually kind of like start signing up customers. So that's going to be an open question. And that could go hand in hand with a second tranche. If it's unallocated in the first tranche, it could go into the second tranche. There's another separate issue that was specifically addressed in the legislation, and it's not unallocated capacity, but unsubscribed energy. And there is a mechanism in there in which the utilities, because they are taking all the energy from these projects, are able to more or less bank it. Now, you're not banking the energy. We don't have a big storage facility that's going to be holding those electrons, but it is an accounting mechanism that would allow a utility to hold that going forward. And if it never gets subscribed, then it gets recovered through rates, and that's specified in the Act. Anastasia again. Take yourself on mute, please.
Yeah, I'm trying. Thank you, Arthur. I think that what you just said, though, about the unsubscribed in a time period, that's, it's fascinating. That's the direction the commission is going. It again raises that elephant in the room problem, though, of at what point will the potential subscriber organizations or developers know what the real costs are because they don't have their internet connection costs. I mean, it's a very complicated circular process, but we would hate to see somebody, obviously for City of Las Cruces, it would be El Paso Electric, lose an assignment of capacity based on the fact that the bids aren't being made because the information isn't there to the potential bidders. And I truly have no idea what the solution to this problem is. I just want to alert everybody to the problem.
Well, to be resolved, and we'll get there when I have discussions about unresolved issues and interconnection in particular, but thanks for raising that.
Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else out there? Otherwise, we'll move along. While the agenda said that we were going to close off this portion at 11:30, we're going to go as long as we need to on this. We have lots of time, and my presentation will change to reflect how much discussion we have here. Okay, so this is another big topic, which is determining and applying the value of solar credits per rate class. I'm going to share the screen for a minute and pull up a document that I have, which was in trying to boil down what estimates of the solar bill credit might look like. We had asked the utilities via a data request to give us a refined estimate of what it would look like for residential class and small business class. Now that is confused in that, for instance, PNM has a tiered rate structure, so there were 3 different levels of pricing that goes into the TAR, which is the total average revenue rate. And as you can see from this, we still have a wide variety of outcomes, of potential outcomes, in that while the TAR for the 3 utilities kind of falls within a range of 11 to the top rate 17%, but somewhere in between there. When you subtract out the distribution costs, it leaves you with a solar bill credit. And then when you look at the transmission component of that, the utilities had included transmission costs in the delivery cost, right, and subtracted that bundled rate out. So if we then take transmission rates out, we see a very different outcome, and it kind of brings people into more of an alignment. So, for instance, SPS had a pretty low rate of 3.5 cents or 4 to 4.5 cents as their solar bill credit first estimate. But transmission cost is a pretty big component of that, 2 to 2.6 cents. So if the transmission cost is included in the solar bill credit, it brings that rate up, and then you have a much tighter band of results, right? 669 going up to 12.8 on the highest tier for PNM, which is a little bit more palatable and a little bit more encouraging that project developers could actually build these projects and both make some money and provide some savings for the customers. Now, again, these are estimates. We would have to go through a real analysis for this, but that's not the end of the story. We did get some preliminary analysis from a consultant for the Community Solar Advocacy Group that really kind of like looked at what the utilities were calling distribution costs and made some recommendations for changes to that changed the nature of this significantly. And here in the last 2 columns, we can see that the commercial rate and the residential rate do differ from what's in bold here for each of the utilities, such that we're really looking at a solar bill credit that could be in the 8.5 cents to as much as 14 cents, but more likely in the 12 cents range for each of the utilities, which would be pretty much in line with what we're seeing in Colorado and other states. So I'm just raising this as an indicator that there is more work to be done, okay? That we really need a thorough analysis vetted by the utility staff of the commission, right? To look over kind of how this methodology is done, because the commission is going to have to approve the methodology and then tell the utilities to come up with the rate calculation. And we need to get agreement on exactly what we're talking about here. The transmission component is the big element of that, but also some of the subcomponents of distribution. And I've encouraged Carl Abigail to share his analysis with the utilities so that they can work it out. And maybe we don't have to fight about it. Maybe we can agree to it in the rulemaking. But that's essentially what we're seeing from the get-go here, is that there is more work to be done. Okay, Matt, do you have any comments on this before I take it off screen?
No.
This is, again, preliminary numbers, No determinations.
No, nothing further from my end, Arthur. Thank you.
Okay, anybody want to address this? Please raise your hands. Somebody in chat. Let's see here. Values was yes, do not have a rec value. Yes, including that. That's another issue, Carl. What the utilities gave us in their estimation was the average cost of meeting their RPS commitments, which by and large for everybody was about 0.8 cents per kilowatt hour. That doesn't actually reflect the full environmental attributes of renewable energy, and it also doesn't reflect the potential analysis of distributive benefits of renewable energy going forward. There are two things to look at here. One is, what is the value of a REC today versus what is the value of a REC in the future? We are going to be signing contracts for 25 years, so it really doesn't make sense to sign up assign a value to RECs based on today's market, where the utilities are generally meeting their RPS commitments and have a little bit more, so the value in the market is depressed. It's going to get harder to meet that RPS commitment as we move towards 50, 80% in the 2030, 2040 time period. And so we really need to understand kind of like what the value of time is, right? So I think that you will see from the commission an invitation for analysis of the value of REC going forward brought back to a net present value. I know for folks that don't do statistics, that's going to be a little bit difficult, but you have people on staff that can do this, and it's going to be part of the conversation going forward. The second is, are there distributed benefits to the REC that should be determined and assigned? Not just social value of carbon emission reductions, but other things like that. That's a big conversation, and obviously the stakeholder group didn't have a chance to get into it, but it is on the table for consideration. Whether it's resolved by April 1st of next year, I don't know, but that's going to be another issue. I do want to make one more mention about transmission, is that if we structure this right, community solar projects should not be using the transmission system, right? They should be attached to the distribution system. And there may be some instances where that's necessary, and some component of transmission cost might be figured into the solar bill credit calculation. But by and large, these are distributed generation resources that should be avoiding the use of transmission, and that should be a recognized benefit of it. That's my position, not necessarily commission's position, but that's kind of like, to me, logically. So I'm willing to entertain comments. Adam Alvarez from PNM has his hand raised.
Hey, Art, thank you very much. I agree that last statement that you had with the transmission, there could be a scenario where folks down in Deming, the developer puts a community solar project down in Deming, but has subscribers up in Albuquerque. That would need transmission. So we do have concerns about whether the transmission cost is included in that bill credit. Another question we had is, would the consultant for comparing the bill rate, will they be sharing their analysis? Will it be up in the OneDrive, or will they be presenting it?
I know that Carl is on, and Kevin Cray is the one that's working with him on that. I've encouraged them to work this offline between you guys. So Kevin?
Yeah, Adam, this is Kevin with CCSA. I'll reach out tomorrow and set up some time to go through the analysis. I guess if representatives from SPS and EPE can let me know who they'd like to include, that'd be helpful, and I'll just kind of, we can go through it with everyone all at once.
Okay.
Carl, I don't know if you have anything to add.
For PNM, it would be Stella Chan and Mike Settlage, but I can reach you offline and give you their contact. Thank you.
Right.
Okay, I'll throw my email in the chat. And so, yeah, if all the utilities could just let me know who they would like to include, I'd be happy to set that up.
Yes, great. We encourage that. Mike D'Antonio from Excel.
Thanks, Art. Mike D'Antonio here with Xcel Energy. I guess from the transmission perspective, every single customer that signs up for community solar will be getting their power in the evening when the sun's not shining from the system, a system product from the utility, right? So, I mean, we've got transmission in place to serve all of those customers from all of our generating assets. So our contention is that delivery costs still need to be accounted for, and the delivery investment the utilities make for 24/7 service is relevant. And so we still think the transmission is not a viable one to not include in the credit, the billing credit. So.
Okay, I appreciate that, and it comes down to how we interpret the language of the act, which in my reading specifically takes transmission out of the component that gets subtracted. Okay, so we're going to be going before the legislative committee, the Water and Natural Resources Committee on Thursday. This is one of the topics that I'm going to raise. Maybe we can get some clarification on intent from that, but you know, I'm going to say this, and I've said this many times in my career, that the electric utility business is 10% physics and 90% accounting. And it's really up to the matter of finding what the fair accounting mechanism is. And so we have two very different positions on this, and it will come down to the commission making a decision. Anybody else on this so that we can move forward? I see a bunch of chat. Market balance available, solar recs. Yeah, okay. So there's a lot of conversation here. I can't really address all this stuff. This mostly looks like a continuation of the discussion from the stakeholder groups. We would encourage the Community Solar Access Group to work with the utilities on agreement in terms of the methodology, and that would go a long way towards reaching agreement on what the final numbers are. Before we move on to the next one, there was, and Matthew had identified this as a suggestion from the Sovereign Energy Group, in terms of what we do with tribe subscribers and rural co-ops. It's a quandary because the commission really doesn't have jurisdiction over rates for those entities, right? So I think that where my recommendation would be is that we do our best to identify the methodology and how it should be applied such that it's a model for those entities to use. Because rural co-ops can be the host of community solar projects without really coming into our jurisdiction, right? This could all be tribal project on rural co-op land that serves tribal subscribers and maybe rural co-op subscribers, and it doesn't really have to fall into our jurisdiction necessarily, to be determined. I think there's some disagreement about that. But what we can do best is come up with the policy, with a methodology that's acceptable, and then have each individual entity use that methodology to determine what these rates are, and then the commission incorporates them into our rules. Okay. Moving ahead to number 4, and hopefully this one won't be quite so time-consuming, calculation of the 3% limit. I think this is one where we agreed to disagree. If I can characterize it that, Anastasia? Again,
my hand was raised, Arthur. Am I on now? My hand was raised a second ago, and it goes to the chat conversation. And I just wanted to point out, since you raised the point about the statute being pretty clear on transmission, that as far as RECs go, the way that the Renewable Energy Act currently says that, basically for a REC to be usable, for a utility to use a REC, a New Mexico utility to use a REC, it has to be delivered energy. So I think that at least under the current state of the law, the idea that RECs are marketable or something is really questionable or of very limited importance.
Okay, well, you and I can have a conversation offline because RECs are one of my areas of specialty. And yes, RECs are marketable. That's the whole point, right? That's how you assign a value to a REC is what the market is willing to pay for it. But it looks like at least the sentiment from the stakeholder participation is that the utilities get to use these. They've been bequeathed to the utilities as part of the act. The real question for the PRC is, are they being valued properly, right? And that is a determination to be made. Okay, I'm sorry. Moving on to 4, which is the limitation. Anybody have anything in particular to say about this? We don't have enough information. There are some elements of cross-subsidization that I'm going to address in my portion of the show. Anybody raising your hands? I'm not seeing anything here. Okay. See, we can get through this stuff. Number 5, co-location. This is another area that, while it seemed like there were a lot of different flavors of support, basically, my interpretation is it comes down to, you've got a project, you've got up to 5 megawatts per parcel of land. I'm a little confused about the co-location of a couple of projects on the same parcel of land using different substations. Is that even possible? Right? That's one question. I think that the goal here is, of course, that you don't have a bunch of projects, you're one big project that's carving out little 5 megawatt portions of it, calling it something else. Any additional insights to this, Matthew, that will help me understand exactly what the policy ought to be?
Yeah, I think in the course of some of our working group conversations, there was recognition that some of the land parcel topology in New Mexico is such that there are potentially some very large land parcels in New Mexico that may make a sort of parcel specific limitation a bit unwieldy in certain parts. And that really what this was about is, sort of, again, the spirit of which is trying not to circumvent the project megawatt cap on an individual project basis, and that if there was interconnection across separate substations on a very large parcel of land, it sort of still meets the spirit and intent of the requirement, and also acknowledges just that there may be some larger land parcels in New Mexico vis-a-vis other jurisdictions where community solar programs have been rolled out before. And I also see, I believe Kevin has his hand raised as well.
Yeah, Kevin.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify. I think this was the recommendation and our comments didn't quite maybe get articulated correctly in the report. The theory is that, below 5 megawatts, there should be basically no restrictions. And so if you want to do 5 1 megawatt arrays for whatever reason on a parcel, that's fine. The thought was really, if you were going to allow for multiple 5 megawatt projects on a single very large parcel, they would have to be interconnected to different substations. So that was kind of an exclusion for exceeding the 5 megawatts per parcel, which was kind of otherwise the basis for our recommendation. So just wanted to clarify that.
Okay, we'll take a closer look at the position statement that you had, and I mean, what I'm thinking of is here that we have this offer from the state land trust that they have a lot of land and they would like to see it used for these things, and I can't imagine why we would limit a large body, a large tract of land to one 5 megawatt project if in fact it could handle more. It's just really the interconnection at that point, what the availability and costs are. So we'll look at that a little bit more closely. Everybody else want to weigh in on this? Going once. Going twice. Oh yeah, and there is there's an issue here, and it really is important that the size of a community solar project could, on a particular feeder or distribution line, essentially eliminate the ability of smaller projects, household rooftop solars, to connect. And we have to deal with that. We're trying to deal with that in the interconnection proceeding. So I'll just note that that is an issue. Matt is going to have to leave at 11:45. Of course, we're taking a little bit more time, but I think that the following issues can be addressed here without Matt's presence. Maggie is going to stay on to listen and take notes.
Let me just confirm with Maggie, but I believe that might be possible. Yeah. Thank you, Arthur. Hold on.
Yeah. My reading of these is that the ones that are coming up are a little bit less, not contentious, but a little bit more cut and dry on that. So topic number 6 is the criteria for low-income customer definition. The commission is looking into how do we define this, and LIHEAP is one of the main categories of pre-qualification programs. I'm not quite sure that we would have access to information on first-time homeowner programs or federal tax credit programs, but we are getting information from the LIHEAP administrator in New Mexico, and we'll be asking the utilities to help verify that. The important thing is also to get some distribution of where those customers are. You know, I just got an email from the Department of Energy yesterday asking about our prospective program, and they wanted to know the zip codes where the customers are. Right? And I can't tell them that information because I don't know yet, but that will be useful information. Does anybody want to just chime in on this particular aspect of eligibility? Certainly, we've already raised the issue of perhaps taking on an organization that can help pre-vet subscribers so that there's a pool of subscribers ready to choose projects. And we would certainly encourage people to sign up for projects that are closer to the load, right, on that. So there's an interaction with that. And the commission will, of course, be very interested in making sure that the 30% carve out for each project is met, because that's in the law. Anybody else on this? Okay, hearing none. And you know, of course, we're talking about really kind of reviewing the positions that people have taken in the stakeholder group before making a decision on what goes into the rule, and having more conversation as the notebook goes on. Topic number 7, subscriber eligibility for small service, commercial service. I think the one issue here is that SPS's tariff is at a smaller level, 25 kW, whereas PNM's and EPE's is 50 kW. And can somebody from the utility just clarify for me, is that a peak demand per month? Is that an average demand over a period of time? Because we might have businesses that have seasonal differences in their tariffs, in their demand requirements. Can somebody tell me how your small power service tariff is structured? Because I don't get into rates.
Hey, Art,
Michael?
for
Yeah.
SPS, if you hit 25 kW in any month, you got to be below that. So it's any month that you hit that maximum.
Okay, so it's a maximum peak.
Yeah.
Okay. Is that the same for
If
the
I
other
recall
utility
correctly, it's over
territories?
like a 15-minute period.
I'm sorry, Kevin.
Oh, I was just going to say, if I remember correctly, that's over a 15-minute period. So you're asking for a time duration. So I think that's how they're capturing it. If I remember correctly.
That's essentially instantaneous in the way that we do things. So okay, so that's essentially a peak load. That helps me. Okay, all right. And then the question there is, do we just up SPS so that it's the same? Is there a different character to your small commercial class there, Mike, that made this decision to have it at a much lower level?
Art, I'm not sure about that. I think that you either qualify them on some utilities qualifying on a kilowatt hour per month basis, some of them on a maximum demand basis. We do it more on a maximum demand basis. But I don't know the characteristics different, that how they differ from utility to utility to make that classification. I think it's
Well, yeah,
just what they
I know your
chose.
territory, the profile of your customer base is very different than the other two utilities. So we may have to put out a data request for how many customers are served under these tariffs, and maybe ask SPS to kind of like go up a notch. And if they don't fit into this 25 kW, what's the next option for their tariff, and how many customers might be available in that rate class, just so that we have a sense of what potential demand might be, but that's for another day. And, Christian, you have your hand raised?
Thanks, Arthur. I didn't get my hand up in the final seconds of the prior topic, so this is a comment.
You lose out, man. Go ahead.
Just regarding your statement that the PRC has access to limited data or information, and would likely be the case with the IOUs as well, of other programs that might show eligibility of a household being in a certain low income classification. I just want to reiterate that that's one advantage of using third party organizations that are already working with low income communities. There's been success with this in Colorado as well as Oregon, where those third-party organizations do have access, can have access to information from a number of other low-income qualifying projects. And so that would be one way of using those third-party organizations, that you could have a developer can have access to a host of community members who are in pre-qualifying programs. And that could as well be a reason for as our submitted comments advocated for, the possibility of maybe having some sort of a portal on the PRC website where organizations that work with low-income communities, it could be advertised, they could then apply and get approved as kind of a mediator to low-income communities that developers and IOUs could utilize.
Okay, thank you for that. We'll talk about the resources available to do such a thing, but that's another issue for my presentation. Thank you, Christian. Anybody else before we move on? We're at number 7, and moving on to number 8, which is the uniform disclosure. As Matt indicated, I'm working with a subgroup that includes Lisa LaRoque from City of Las Cruces, and Kevin Gedko from the Attorney General's Office, and Kevin Cray, to actually identify what the forms will look like. So it's not so much a real issue of policy determination. We appreciate what the stakeholder group has come up with in terms of the elements that should be recognized on those forms. And this would be both the disclosure form and taking care of the final topic, number 10, which is what a registration form for a subscriber organization would look like. If you participated in the August 27th workshop, I did present some form models, and we've kind of centered on ones that seem to work pretty well. One is the Massachusetts disclosure form, which is a list of all these major issues that the subscriber really needs to check off and say, yes, I've been told about this, right? And then a reference to the agreement that subscriber organization has with that customer and what page that's on. So that essentially it's all in one place that refers to another more important and more detailed document, and both parties sign off on it. So we have a clear line of communication between them. And some of the elements that are included in that could well represent an extension of a consumer protection policy. That's the other area that we're talking about, which is, should the commission essentially lay out what the consumer protection expectations are between subscriber and subscribing organization, such that we kind of clarify expectations and set up a dispute resolution mechanism, and have a cause for action if there is some egregious breach on one or the other. That's still to be determined, but that's in the works as well. Anybody want to weigh in on this? Because I do appreciate the elements that were raised in the stakeholder discussion, and especially the proposals from the joint commenters on that. Anybody else? No. Okay. This will really be the last one, potential limitations on the use of RECs. I don't think that there is any real controversy about this. As I mentioned earlier, the RECs have been bequeathed to the utilities under the terms of the acts. That means the utilities can use them to meet their RPS, and if they don't need them, they can sell them in the marketplace. That's just a question of, if they sell them, should some of that money go back to ratepayers? And I think that there should be policies in place to talk about that. Certainly, it would be a subtraction from the requirements of meeting the RPS program, but that's another issue that's not community solar based. So anybody have anything that they want to say about that element? No, hearing none. Okay. More discussion will be needed around the issues of consolidated billing. I will just note that our compatriots in Oregon decided on consolidated billing and hired a contractor to do the programming for the utility bills, and got a $750,000 contract to do that. I don't have $750,000, so we're going to have to figure this out. More discussion is necessary with regard to native community solar projects and their interaction. I kind of indicated that the best the commission can do is really kind of like work our rules and offer our rules as a model. There would be times, for instance, if a rural co-op decides to opt into the program and how much it needs to follow all the rest of the rules. I think the general census is that it would follow all the rules if it opts in. That's the point of opting in. Other than that, so that's going through the strategy and report. Matthew had to leave us. I just again want to thank everybody for the work that went into that, and we'll open it up one more time for any closing comments. We are not taking specific comments on the report because everything is now going into the docket. However, I will confer with Commissioner Maestas with regard to accepting comments on this workshop, and which could include comments on the report, not to reiterate your positions, not to get another bite at the apple, but what I call errors and omissions. If there was something that was misrepresented, then we should certainly know about that and put that into the record. But by the end of the day, we'll have a determination of that. Okay. I think I'm going to vary from the agenda a little bit. I was supposed to start my presentation 25 minutes ago. Instead, what we're going to do is schedule the 15-minute break now. It is now 6 minutes before noon. Let's come back at 10 minutes after noon, and then I'll go through my presentation, and then we'll have the Office of the General Counsel talk about the formal NOPR process. So everybody, you got 15 minutes. Thanks. Okay, everybody, by my clock, I have 10 minutes after noon, and so I'd like to continue. You ought to be able to see the screen that I have before me, which is just the first slide of a deck that I put together. And so I'm just going to kind of like go through this. All right, nice little graphic with nice Albuquerque and New Mexico colors. Right, you all know this. These are the basic parameters of the program. 200 megawatts across the 3 investor-owned utilities in the first 3 years. Relationship of Native American tribes, nations, pueblos. Exempt really from PRC jurisdiction. There are some questions around the edges of that in terms of subscribing to other projects and also being hosts of projects. That the Commission does not consider an entity that is building or operating a project as a utility just for being part of this program, which means that we do not have rate jurisdiction over them. So that's an important aspect of this, is that while we're concerned about what the subscription rate might be for customers, the Commission doesn't have a yay or nay say over that. The biggest unresolved question, and I've alluded to this, is who will administer the program. And that really comes down to the funding of the program. So, you know, the Commission could be the administrator and have dedicated or shared staff. In other states, they hired some people and that there would be program administrators or added to the Consumer Affairs Department. Secondarily, in other states, utilities are designated as the administrator and get their costs recovered through rates. The Act specifically says that we have to allow utilities to recover the rates of being in the program and interconnecting these projects. Third, the Commission could employ a third-party administrator or a set of contractors for specific components of the program. We alluded to Oregon in particular, which hired a third-party administrator and also had a contractor for doing the consolidated billing, and at least one other entity that was charged with helping to qualify subscribers for the project. So there were a number of outside entities used for the Oregon program, which my understanding is a pilot of 90 megawatts the first time around, and then an additional 90 megawatts. So it's comparable in size to the New Mexico program. What is not comparable at all is the amount of money that the Oregon Commission was afforded in the passage of their act, right? It's been termed as $2.5 million over a several year period. The contract for the outside administrator was approximately $500,000. I referenced the contract for the programming of the consolidated billings, $750,000. I don't know what the third contract was. We recently asked the National Renewable Energy Lab to tell us what programs cost in other states around the country, and those are the firmest numbers that we came up with. So it's really a problem here in New Mexico because under the Act, the PRC does have the option of charging application fees to subscribing organizations in order to defray program costs, but there's no mechanism for accessing those fees. Under the terms of the bill, now law, the Commission has to turn over proceeds received the next day to essentially the state treasury. And there is no mechanism built into the law for us to access that. Also, when in passing the bills, there was no budget allocation and no specific additional staffing allocation given to the PRC for this. So far we've been working because I'm an outside entity that the U.S. Department of Energy pays me. I've been able to apply time and effort to this. We were able to scrape together money for a contract for Citation to do the facilitation, and we used up all that money. So we really are facing a severe question, and answering that question will help us determine what the proper administrative role should be for the commission going forward. Now, it was referenced by Commissioner Maestas that we're appearing before the legislature this week on Thursday. There's a hearing of the Water and Natural Resources Committee. On Thursday, we're going to be giving an update on implementation of Community Solar Act. And then on Friday, our Chief of Staff, Wayne Probst, is going to be making a presentation about budget requests for both a supplemental budget request for the rest of this fiscal year, positions and money for next fiscal year. And I think we have an emergency loan application in, trying to get enough funds so that we can implement this program in a timely manner without hitting delays. So all I can say is that we request your support as we go before the legislature. It's out of my hands, but that's the big issue. That's the number one issue that we're facing in terms of unresolved issues. Anybody have a comment on that, or otherwise I'll just move forward on the next. We've already talked about the major areas. I bundled them into these areas that will be determined in the rulemaking: consumer protection, rate making issues, which is the solar bill credit at all; market oversight, largely as defined by the strategy report as the selection of projects and the allocation of capacity, as well as some other issues; community outreach and involvement, that's what we're doing right now; and then the information collection for the November 2024 report. All right, and the rule that you see that comes out in a couple of weeks will touch on all of these areas. Under consumer protection, the stakeholders have already had a lot of discussion about establishing the criteria for registration, and we'll see a form that is developed around that. The uniform disclosure, we had a good discussion about that and what elements should be put into that. And another area that we didn't really talk about is translating this into English and Spanish and possibly native or indigenous languages. That may not be enough. We have discussion in the healthcare field here in New Mexico is that increasingly there are other languages that informational materials need to be translated into. So the commission is going to have to deal with that going forward. Again, money. Policies regarding defaults in delivery obligations, bankruptcy, termination of community solar projects, which could lead to possible bonding requirements. This was not a topic of consideration for the stakeholder group. There is certainly some sense, and there was some discussion about a partially refundable fee that kind of like to make sure that project developers have skin in the game, so to speak, and some of that money could get refunded to them when they actually come online. But I'm really talking about bonding in case the project starts and then fails, and then who holds that under the terms of the act. The utilities are kind of on the hook for taking all energy deliveries from projects, but that's as far as the act goes in terms of defining that. So I think that the commission would be remiss in not entertaining some ideas as to how to deal with that in the rulemaking, and so that'll be part of it. These areas that are in yellow are areas that we've had discussion about determining the solar bill credit, interpreting the 3% limitation. I won't go into detail on that. We did mention the application fees assessed from subscriber organizations. What the level of that fee is has not been determined. If the commission actually had access to that money and could use it to defray the costs of administration, it would argue for one level of fee setting. If we don't get to see that money, then honestly, it argues for a lot lower fee because it doesn't make any difference. And then it would become just a processing fee. And different states do different things. You'll see a figure, I think, in the rule, But again, the rule is for discussion, not for determination at this point. At the bottom, we have cost allocation alternatives for distribution upgrades necessary to accommodate CS projects that are deemed in the public interest and showing a system benefit. We've had a lot of discussion of this in the parallel interconnection rulemaking stakeholder process, in which a report that was also issued on Friday of last week lays out several options for the Commission to consider with regard to cost sharing or even rate basing of projects, interconnection upgrade projects that are deemed to be grid modernization projects, right? And we have a separate act, which was the Grid Modernization Act of 2019, which actually established some criteria for the Commission to use in determining that if a grid modernization proposal from a utility or one that the Commission requests comes before it for a determination of should some or all of this project be included in rate base, or should there be some cost sharing mechanism among, for instance, developers who are using the same circuit, or some other element. We had 6 or 7 different options to consider. That I think that you'll see a placeholder in the rule that addresses this and some attempt to align policies in interconnection along with the Community Solar Act, along with the Grid Modernization Act, so that everything is being judged on the same basis. Now, a key consideration for community solar here is because we have the cross-limitation subsidization, the Commission would have to make a determination, and hopefully we would get legislative support for this, that projects or components of projects, some level of the cost associated with projects that are deemed to be in the public benefit because of grid modernization or for outreach to communities as per the Grid Mod Act, would not be considered a subsidy, right? Those components of the costs, right? That's could be contentious, but I expect that you'll see some language in the proposed rule that at least addresses that, and then we'll open it up and have people talk about it. Market oversight, we talked about allocation of the program capacity. We talked about process for selection. We didn't really talk about reasonable uniform standards, fees, and processes for interconnection because those are being addressed into the interconnection proceeding. There's a lot of overlap in the parties that have been involved in the stakeholder processes for both. I anticipate that we will have parallel rulemakings, and my goal is to have the interconnection rulemaking in place before the community solar policies, before the contracts are signed for community solar projects, so that they can rely on the interconnection revisions. Siting location, we talked about policies to limit potential discrimination in favor of utility affiliated subscriber organizations. That might be simple, that might be contentious. I don't know. I think that we're going to see some kind of language in the rule about that. Establishing data and operational reporting requirements for the projects and the utilities. And you can expect to see some language in the rule about that, even though it wasn't addressed in the stakeholder processes. Continuing on market oversight, ensuring the subscription allocations are met. That's a core responsibility of the Commission, and that goes back to administration. Whoever is administrating this program is going to have this as a key responsibility. And what we do about it if a project is not meeting these eligibility carve-outs is another issue, and that would be subject to the rule. Process for approval of tariffs, forms, and other documents. I think basically, generally what states do is they approve the policy and the rule, and then tell the utilities to come back in a certain time period with tariffs that put those rules into effect. I would imagine something similar to that, but we could talk with General Counsel on that. Refining the policy for unsubscribed energy, we may or may not need refinement on that. There was an issue about use of RECs on that and whether RECs have to be associated with energy delivery. That was one of the components of the Energy Transition Act that kind of muddied the waters on REC markets. And determination of ongoing caps after 2024. while this was bundled into the policies that the commission should determine by April 1st of next year, I don't think that we're going to have enough information to make that determination. So that could be something going forward. Finally, community outreach and involvement. That's what we're doing today, and we'll continue to do it. The big issue, and this was raised in the stakeholder group, was that if the commission identifies service organizations that can pre-qualify subscribers, how are they going to get trained? How are they going to get monitored? How are they going to get compensated? Again, this goes back to administration and access to administrative costs and cost recovery. Those are issues that are undetermined at this time, and so we have to figure that out. Finally, this is all the criteria for status report to the legislature. I won't go through this because this is just taken directly from the act, but basically once this gets off the ground, the commission or the administrator and the utility is going to have to work together in order to develop reporting mechanisms so that we get this information on an ongoing basis, and then it'll all go into a report that's due November 1st, 2024, on especially evaluation of the effectiveness of the commission rules and any changes recommended going forward. This could be changes to the cap, could be changes to recommended changes to the derivation of the solar bill credit. It could be changes to any component of this that the commission recommends, and then the legislature will act on it, hopefully, on that. So that's all I had there. I will open it up to any questions. So if I can possibly stop sharing here. And then again, please use the reaction button on the bottom right if you have a hand raised and you want to talk about any of these issues and the process going forward. I know we have an interest in establishing some more subgroups, and that's a question that we have to determine going forward. So any comments, questions, observations, concerns? Raising your hand. Let me look at chat. Okay, a couple of comments in chat. Our senator representing New Mexico would have an interest in bringing funding to PRC through the Recovery Act, suggests Andrew Stone. I'll tell you that we have been in communication with Senator Heinrich's office regarding funding for specific elements, both of community solar and interconnection. Until the Congress passes some kind of infrastructure bill that has money attached to it, I can't count on those chickens until they're hatched. Separately, question about the PowerPoints. Yes, they are available in the dockets. They will be posted in the docket with information. Okay, citation for the Grid Modernization Act. I'm going to have to look that up. It was AB 233, passed in 2019, sponsored, authored by Melanie Stansberry. If that can help you find it, I'll look and see what the chapter information was and get that to you before the end of the day, Jacob. Okay. Anything else? Okay, it is now 12:30, and I'm going to turn it over to Russell Fisk from the Office of the General Counsel. Russell, you were on earlier. Are you on now?
Yes, I'm here, Mark.
Okay, great. You're being tasked with talking about the actual NOPR process and schedule, but let me ask you this question because it was raised at the tail end before we went on break, which is the mechanism for the commission to consider any additional, less formal process regarding subgroups on particular issues like the subscriber organization and outreach to potential subscribers or the consumer protection issues that we're talking about. What would be the normal commission process in the context of a rulemaking for entertaining such ideas, since we wouldn't have an outcome from that until after we published a draft of the rule?
Well, Art, as has been discussed, the issuance of an order issuing the NOPR, and a NOPR is a notice of proposed rulemaking that gets published in the New Mexico Register, that commences the formal rulemaking process. And an ordinary rulemaking, that would mean one round of written comments and a hearing that would be transcribed, a public hearing. We usually do not hold workshops during the process or working groups during this formal process, because the formal process is one in which the State Rules Act applies, and it requires that the commission receive comments according to a schedule, and in writing, and also, as I said, at a hearing that's transcribed, and that the commission has to address every single argument and proposal that's made in those comments. So we generally view this as a time that should be only for formal proceedings, at least with regard to the commission's involvement itself. Those who would like to make proposals that they feel they need to meet with others on could, essentially hold their own workshops among themselves, and then include any proposals that they come up with in their comments that are filed according to the comment schedule that'll be published with the NOPR. That would be a way of doing it. I think that's probably the best way, in that the proposals would be embodied in formal comments that would be part of the written record, to which other commenters could respond, or could be made at the public hearing. But again, it wouldn't be a workshop process in which the commission or anyone else associated with the commission is involved in workshops. But of course, the participants, if they want to meet informally among themselves to formulate formal comments, that would be something that might be a reasonable way to address that.
Okay, and then the other element of that question is taking comments on the strategy report and or this workshop prior to the actual publication of the draft rule. Is that something that we could offer people the opportunity to, as long as they keep them short, and just have that available in the docket?
Yes, that is perfectly reasonable, because, as I said, it's the issuance of the NOPR itself that begins the formal process. So the problem, of course, would be not a formal legal issue with receiving more comments, informal comments at this time. It would be with regard to time, how much time we actually have to incorporate any such comments into the proposed rule. We're going to be presenting the team. I'm counsel of the commission, but I'm also a member of the Community Solar Action Team. We'll be presenting this recommended draft proposed rule to the commission next week at next week's open meeting. And we might, we're hoping to actually have it adopted by the commission as the proposed rule that begins the formal process next week. So there isn't a lot of time to deal with any comments about the report that anyone wants to see as embodied and changed in the proposed rule itself. Now, of course, those anything that any participants in the process see as an issue with the report can be raised in the formal comment process as well, and maybe the motivation or the reason for a criticism of the proposed rule, or an alternative proposal that's based on the fact that the report didn't include such and such, or misstated such and such, or didn't address such and such. So that can be done in the formal process as well. So I think really when it comes to doing more informal comments, particularly with regard to the report, it is a timing issue at this point. I mean, there wouldn't be much time to incorporate that, and to the extent they would impact the proposed rule, to incorporate that into the proposed rule, which we're working on getting done, hopefully our draft for the recommendation to the commission this week. So
Okay. So I guess probably the best thing is hold your fire, everybody. If you have a particular interest, you can let Strategy know. They're going to be closing out their email pretty soon, and we're going to transfer documentation over into a commission repository. But when the commission sends out its formal notice on the rulemaking, we'll probably include guidance as to making any comments on the report if necessary, or the workshop if necessary, and other things. So we'll try and incorporate that in his guidance. Is that okay, Russell?
Yes, Art, that's absolutely correct. This order issuing the NOPR that will possibly be issued by the commission next week will include the usual sorts of instructions that are in an ordinary rulemaking that the commission does in various areas, but we'll include some things probably that are a bit unusual due to the fact that this is an unusual rulemaking. For instance, generally, the order issuing NOPR, and in this case, this is true as well, will include the notice of proposed rulemaking itself, which is really just a formal document. It's a one to 2 page document that summarizes what the rulemaking is about. That's not going to be all that helpful to you, but it'll be to the participants who are really familiar with the details of this already. But that's the actual notice that gets published. It refers to the proposed rule. The proposed rule will also be an exhibit, so there'll be 2 exhibits to this order, and that's what you'll be looking very closely at. But generally, in an order issuing NOPR, the proposed rules itself, all the notice that is given in terms of the specifics of what the commission is considering for a rule. As Art said, though, in this process of this workshop and working group process, we haven't even been able to address all of the various issues that will come up with that need to be decided. And so the order will include questions as well, which will be the questions regarding things that haven't even been addressed in this proposed rule because the working groups and the workshops we didn't have sufficient time to address them. So we want to look for that order. I hope all of the participants are on our service list because the order will be available in the docket as well through eDocket, as Art mentioned with regard to last week's notice of filing. But you want to make sure you're on the service list because this order will be the blueprint for going forward. It will include due dates for initial comments, which will be due within about 30 days of the publication within the register. I'm not giving you specific dates yet because that will be in the order itself next week. And if it's not issued next week, then the following week, then we may have to change some of those dates. But there'll be initial comments due about 30 days into the process. Commissioner Myers just gave a good summary of how this will proceed in general. Then there'll be a set of response comments. These are written response comments, written initial and written response comments where you can address, any of these issues, including the questions that will be asked in the order issuing NOPR concerning subjects that are not addressed in the proposed rule, and then also support or criticism of the proposed rule and alternative language for the proposed rule. And then a date for a public hearing, which we will be limiting to comments from those who have not submitted written comments. I think you can all understand that we have a limited amount of time to deal with, so we have to put certain limits on these things. And then there'll be a set of written reply comments due after that. For responding to what was said at the hearing and also responding to the response comments. So I think there'll be a very full opportunity, a complete opportunity for people to address not only what's in the proposed rule and provide alternatives, but to address the areas that we haven't been able to address so far. That said, this may be a rulemaking that is the first among. There may be further rulemakings in the future. So those are things we might scope out in the order issuing NOPR itself as well. Just allude to them at least, what might be left for future consideration. So I think what you've heard already from Commissioner Maestas and Art were very consistent with what I was going to be saying about this in general anyway. One thing that's a little different from the schedule that we had already adopted and that I believe is still somewhat embodied in the report from Citation, is that we had taken a conservative approach to the April 1st, 2022 deadline that's stated in the Act by initially adopting a schedule for this entire proceeding that would have the rule be effective as of that date. And to be effective, a rule has to be published in the New Mexico Register, which involves, after the commission's issuance of an order adopting a rule, involves can be 2 or 3 weeks between that time and the actual publication. There's a lot of review done by the New Mexico Register or the State Records Office, which administers the register, as to form and things like that. Well, we feel we need the absolute maximum time for, one, the comment period for the participants to continue to comment, and two, for the commission to consider what are going to be very voluminous comments on very important topics as to how to structure the program. So to give us the maximum time, we're taking a less conservative, but still, I think, the obvious approach to take with the language of the act. The language of the act actually says that the commission must adopt rules by April 1st, 2022. So that is, we're construing that to mean our order adopting rules that will be effective not on that date, but the date, a couple of weeks later when they're published. So that gives us a couple extra weeks, which we will absolutely need. So I'm sure, I think there's no doubt we'll need as much time as we absolutely can have. So with that, I think I'll leave it at that and take questions on that, because like I said, the order is going to really lay this out, and it may come out hopefully it will come out as early as next week.
Okay,
So
Russell, we have a question, a basic one: how to get on the service list, and what is the difference between being on the service list and being an active intervener in the case?
To get on the service list, you can contact Isaac Sullivan Leshin. He is on this. You can see he's a participant in this Zoom meeting. You can email him. I believe he's maintaining the service list. So he has an email that he can. Isaac, are you on right now? Okay, he just sent it to everyone. Okay, through chat. So that's the way to get on there. And the other question, what was the other question, Art? I'm sorry.
To be an active intervener.
Oh,
in the rulemaking.
I would clarify this. A rulemaking does not have parties. It does not have interveners. Any interested person, and that the term interested person really means any member of the public may comment. They do not need to be a participant so far, or you don't have to have been a participant in the proceeding already. Any member of the public may comment in the formal comment process. That's one reason why it's published in the New Mexico Register. We also publish in newspapers to make sure that the public in general is aware of the rulemaking and can comment. So you don't need to worry about filing motions to intervene and to become a party, because there are no parties to a rulemaking. You may have seen language in the past in rulemakings, references to parties or people filing motions to intervene, but we're really trying now to clean that up in terms of not using that language ever at all, because those obligations of a party or obligations to file a motion to intervene simply don't apply in a rulemaking. A rulemaking proceeding is easier in that sense. If you want to say something, you just file the comment or come to the hearing as per the schedule that will be in the order issuing NOPR. Okay,
great. And then just clarified, and people can look to the chat to see that Christopher Hall, the advisor to Commissioner Maestas, has noted that the actual dates that you'll see when this comes out really depend on a start date, right? And because it's largely 30 days after this date or 10 days after this date or that. So it really depends on when we formally start this. We hope, against hope, that the formal proceeding actually kind of is in place by November 9th. That's kind of our schedule, our target schedule, and then everything else will kind of flow from that, but you'll see more in detail.
Yes, I'm sorry. But yeah, Art, that November 9th date, that's the New Mexico Register publication date that we're shooting for the notice of proposed rulemaking. And so that does start the formal schedule, and we have to give at least 30 days from that date to have the initial comments due. So that gives you an idea of what we're shooting for. And things may change if the commission needs more time to consider the proposed rule, which would be perfectly understandable. So we'll just see what happens.
Okay, and then final question here. can you address ex parte communication rules or restrictions during a rulemaking?
During a rulemaking, there are no ex parte restrictions. The commission may speak freely with members of the public. There are no parties per se. That's one reason why the ex parte restriction does not apply. It does begin to apply when the record closes, and the order issuing NOPA will include a record closure date, which will be typically we do it 10 days after the final set of comments is due. And at that point, after that time, the commission is considered that the ex parte communication restriction applies. It's a little odd in the realm of rulemakings because there are no parties. So who is restricted from talking to the commission at that time? Well, there's no actual parties, but the commission will generally restrict itself from speaking to any of the commenters at that time. The reason for that is that once the record is closed, additional comments at that, communications, whether written or oral at that time, are ones that won't be in the record. And so they will be, the other participants, members of the public will not have had a chance to respond to them. And that's really what this comment period is about, is getting all of the proposals and criticisms and comments and arguments in writing and giving an ample opportunity for members of the public to respond to those in writing as well. Or as I said at the public hearing, but that is also transcribed, so it ends up in writing in the record. And that's it.
All right, great. I have two important elements that we really haven't talked about, but are really key to the success of this program. One is the alignment with the interconnection proceeding, which has been going on in parallel. And as I mentioned, there was a report in that proceeding, which is 20-00171-UT, as a 2020 date, not a 2021 date. And that report is available, and that's the outcome of a very long stakeholder process that we began back in February and came up with the report parallel. The two rulemakings are going to proceed in parallel, so we have to be really careful about the demands on people's time and the commission resources. So that's an element that really kind of we're putting a lot of thought to making sure it doesn't become a train wreck, right? But actually kind of helps each of the proceedings, since there is so much overlap on key issues. And the second is, and this has been pointed out rightfully so, is that commission processes do not favor participation of the actual people who are going to participate and benefit from this program, which is low-income customers, regular residential customers, small commercial entities. They do not have the time, the bandwidth, or the expertise to get involved in commission processes except through proxies. Representative organizations, community organizations that have the wherewithal and the resources, municipalities that represent their citizenry before the commission, like Las Cruces and the city of Albuquerque, which we're very appreciative of your participation. We need your help. We need your help, everyone. Project developers, service organizations, industry representatives and trade associations, utilities, and your outreach to community organizations in order to both get the word out about the availability of this when it's ready, and also help share the information so that people know exactly what they're getting into if they sign up to be subscribers. The commission only has so much ability to do this kind of outreach through formal channels. We do publication of notices. We kind of like open it up, as Russell said, to anybody that wants to follow this on the service list. And yet we don't want to have big gaps in the community that's served by these programs. That the intent of the legislature is to have as broad a net as possible in order to get people throughout the state. To make this, I mean, that's the whole point of community solar, is to make renewable energy and power from renewable energy available to every household. That is the goal of the National Community Solar Partnership. And it is part of our goal as well, is that we really want a very broad participation in this, because that's the only way it's going to work. So we're going to ask for your help in getting information out. The PRC already has a page that's devoted to basic information that will grow along as we kind of formalize more of the process and have more of the answers to the questions. Our sister agency, the Energy, Minerals, and Natural Resources Division, has a parallel page, and so we'll be keeping those in tandem so that there's a couple of venues. The utilities have a page under Community Solar. PNM's has some really good resources that I'd recommend anybody look to, and we would encourage the other utilities, even the rural co-ops, to put information about community solar, and our team is there to help give you the information that is necessary. So let's continue working together. That's it for me. And one more time, I'm going to open up the floor to any questions, comments. I'll just reiterate a message that you've heard a dozen times today, and it cannot be said enough. We would not be able to do this without your participation in the stakeholder process, participation in the rulemaking, participation and willingness to agree that this is an important program and that we need to come up with solutions to the many vexing questions and unresolved issues that are before us. I'm happy to say that I have not noticed foot dragging. I have not noticed obstructionism. I have not noticed kind of any kind of dyed-in-the-wool knee-jerk reaction against what we're doing here. I think everybody agrees with the goals of the program. It's just making them work. So if I don't see any hands, I'm going to turn it back to Commissioner Maestas for closing statement.
Well, thank you everyone for participating in this third and final workshop. I think, we've been rolling up our sleeves, and I think we better leave our sleeves rolled up, because we still have a final formal phase to bring this effort home and achieve that ultimate vision of making solar energy accessible, affordable, and reliable to those New Mexicans that couldn't otherwise afford rooftop solar. And to me, I think that we can't lose sight of that. And I wanted to thank Matt and all the Stratagen crew for the services that they provided to us. I think that their efforts really did help us stay focused and be organized and converge on areas where we did have consensus. And of course, now it's very apparent where there may not be clear consensus, and decisions will have to be made between now and April 1 to get that final rule published. But I'm proud of all of you. And I know some of you have probably been involved, when this effort first started some 5 years ago. And so you really have to feel very good about this and where we're going. So I'm really honored and privileged just to be a small part of it. And we're going to stay focused. We're going to bring this rulemaking home. As Art said, please participate, provide comments. They will inform the commission's decision-making process. So stay involved, stay engaged, submit comments, and participate in the formal rulemaking. I don't know what's come over me, but I want to leave you with another quote. I'm getting really, sentimental about this whole thing, but this quote is from Francis of Assisi. He was an Italian Catholic friar, a deacon, a mystic, and a preacher. But this is what he said. Start by doing what's necessary, then do what's possible, and suddenly you're doing the impossible. And so I think we're almost there, folks. So let's continue. Let's carry the ball across let's cross the finish line and celebrate, hopefully on April 1 of next year. So anyway, thank you again for participating, and please look forward to commission proceedings to kick off the notice of proposed rulemaking. Thank you all and have a great day. Bye.